I'm going to now ask our relatively new dean, Dean Katrina Bulkley, to come up and introduce our keynote speaker.
Good evening. Good evening. Yeah. I'm not going to. Good evening. Thank you. And welcome again to the 2024 Civic Learning Symposium at Ball State. My name is Katie Bulkley, and I have the privilege as of July 1st of serving as Dean of Teachers College here. Tonight and into tomorrow, we are gathered to engage in meaningful conversations about civic education and engagement. I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you for being here. As we prepare for this event filled with dialogue and reflection, it is important to acknowledge that the work we are doing through civic learning, democratic engagement, and community building is deeply connected to the future of democracy. Tonight, we are incredibly privileged, and I'm a little fangirling here, sorry, to hear from someone who has truly spent his life advancing that mission, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski. Dr. Hrabowski's academic accomplishments are impressive. He holds degrees in mathematics and higher education administration from Hampton University and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Notably, as president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC for those who are familiar, Dr. Hrabowski truly transformed the institution into a national model for inclusive excellence in education. Under his leadership, UMBC became the leading institution for producing Black students who go on to earn PhDs in the natural sciences and engineering. UMBC was also recognized by U.S. News & World Report as the #1 up-and-coming university for 6 years, and was consistently ranked among the top most innovative universities in the country. Personally, I first learned of Dr. Hrabowski's work around student success and student access to higher education, especially for students of color, through the Meyerhoff Scholars Program, which has been nationally recognized as a model for developing talented students, particularly those from underrepresented groups, to pursue graduate degrees and careers in STEM. That work has inspired national initiatives, including the Freeman Hrabowski Scholars Program, which the Howard Hughes Medical Institute launched with a $1.5 billion commitment, that's a B, not an M, to diversify the scientific workforce. It also has inspired in profound ways our very own Ryan Family Navigators program in Teachers College, and I just want to acknowledge our Ryan scholars who are here with us and you'll hear from a little later. In recognition of his transformative contributions, Time magazine named Dr. Hrabowski one of the 100 most influential people in the world. This was not just for his role at UMBC, but for his enduring commitment to providing pathways for students of color to succeed in college and beyond, particularly in fields like science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, fields that have traditionally lacked diversity. While Dr. Hrabowski's accomplishments in higher education are impressive, his story doesn't begin in university hallways. Rather, his commitment to justice and equality started much earlier, in Birmingham, Alabama, where he grew up the son of 2 African-American teachers. His life was shaped by the civil rights movement. At just 12 years old, he participated in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Children's Crusade, a pivotal march for justice, where he was arrested alongside other young children, spending 5 days in jail at the age of 12. This formative experience, along with the devastating loss of friends in the 1963 bombing of Birmingham's 16th Street Baptist Church, ignited a lifelong dedication to education as a path to justice, empowerment, and change. It is fitting, therefore, that Dr. Hrabowski's keynote this evening will focus on civics, democracy, student retention, and college success, topics at the heart of the democratic mission of our education system. His work reminds us that education is not just a tool for individual success, but a powerful force for our society. As we gather here at Ball State to discuss civic learning, leadership, and community engagement, it's important to recognize how closely Dr. Hrabowski's work aligns with our mission. I have had the privilege of working at institutions where I have seen up close the powerful intersection of education and public service, including the role that educators, including many in this room, play in shaping engaged citizens. Tonight, as we listen to Dr. Hrabowski, I encourage you to reflect on the profound connections between education and civic life. His work reminds us that education is not just about personal achievement. It is about equipping individuals with the tools to engage with and improve society. Dr. Hrabowski's career exemplifies the very essence of civic learning, empowering students, particularly those from marginalized backgrounds, to become leaders and active participants in our democracy. So it is my tremendous honor to introduce a visionary leader, an advocate for educational equity, and a tireless champion for students of color. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Freeman A. Hrabowski III.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean. You put a lot of time and thought into that. Thank you very, very much. I am honored to be here. I was here years ago with Joanne, with your former leader. Wonderful. Give that leader a round of applause, Joanne, for what she did. It's very special. And so I've got a challenge tonight. You got faculty from the university, teachers, people from the community. We have college students. I have two of those groups, and I want them to stand. These are the students who are either future teachers, and one writer, I forget that, and future architects. I want them to stand, and I've got two 8th graders here, 7th and 8th graders. All of you stand for a minute. All of you stand. Give them a round of applause. And as someone I would consider a mentee and a fellow Marylander, we claim him in Maryland from when he was at Montgomery College, Jason said, we are all the products of our childhood experiences, and we're also products of how we view the world. And so for my architecture students, as you think about design, not just physical design, but design for a presentation. As you think about stories as future teachers, as I ask them the question in both groups, something I always do, what would you like me to talk about? And particularly, I wanted to hear from students and I asked several of the colleagues in the room. Some said, listen, it's been a long day. I just want to listen. Say whatever you want to say, which was just fine. And someone else said, and I remember her said, how do we get more people to go into elected, to consider going into elected positions? Just as it was Bryson who said, how do we think about a backup career? This is a 13-year-old, very impressive. He and Hezekiah, who, first of all, didn't have to be here, and Dr. Anderson, John invited them to come. And it's a big deal when 13-year-olds want to come and hear an old man talk. Give them one more round of applause for that. It's a big deal. It is. And so one of the challenges we face as teachers, as professors, as leaders, is how to say things that will have enough significance, intellectual significance, that people take you seriously, but things at a level and with language that a 13-year-old can understand, right? We tend to have presentations that we give to people for different levels of groups. And yet, in our society, when elected officials are talking, they're talking to people who may have a college degree, people who may not have a college degree, people who are 13 or people who are 70. And so how does one do that? And so I'm going to do something and ask you a question. I'm standing here, and this is a traditional academic approach to things. If I move out here, and I want both Hezekiah and Bryson to think about this. If I move out here, what's the difference in the way you perceive me or the way I'm connected versus behind the lectern? What would you say? Somebody? Anybody? What is the difference? Yes?
Interaction with the audience.
Give him a round of applause, one of those Ryan Scholars. I love one of those Ryan scholars who presented well, exactly, that there is this sense that when I'm here, I'm right with you. And I do want to have conversation tonight. I'm not speaking to 1,000 people. This is a community. So people in the back rows, can you hear me? Are we okay? All right. I'm by nature a math teacher. I get goosebumps doing math. Goosebumps. Young people, college students, when I was in middle school, 8th grade, or in high school, especially in middle school and high school, teacher would give us 10 problems, and I would say, give us 10 more, teacher, and the whole class would go, shut up, Freeman. And so I have marks on my leg. They would kick me. They'd be so angry at me for being so nerdy somehow. And that is it. But here I go. My essential point today for my English major is that you tell people what you're going to tell them. You tell them. And then you tell them what you told them. Got it? We've all heard that. So my essential point today is one on which I will base my test of all of you. You're all having a test at the end of this. And it is that the way we think about ourselves, the language that we use, the way we interact with each other will be so important. We become like the things we love. It's the notion of our dreams and our values. I often begin with poetry. Carlos Williams said, it's difficult to find news in poetry, and yet men and women die miserably every day because of a lack of what's found there. And so, I believe it was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you tell me, it was 1992, 93, when this poet, whose name is Maya Angelou, have you heard that name, Maya Angelou? Looked into the face of America at the installation of another president. So was it the early 90s or early 80s for 40 years ago? What year was it? 92 or 82? 82. How many for 82? How many for 92? Now, by now, somebody must have Googled it, surely. Because the students are wondering, what am I talking about? It is the installation of which president? Bill Clinton. Have you heard of him, students? Bill Clinton. All right, all right. And how many people in the room, was it 92 or 82? 93. And the reason I know it's 93 is that's when I first became president of UMBC. But I say that because for the older people, how many of you were in the world in the 80s? Okay? So you know what I say when people talk about the 80s or the 90s, you have to think a minute. Is it 3 decades or 4 decades? Because in some ways it was like yesterday, right? All right. But literally, so we are talking about 32 years. Is that right? And in 93, really, almost 32 years. And she said, lift up your eyes upon this day, Bryson and Hezekiah, because my challenge is to keep their attention. Aha. If I can keep their attention, I can keep your attention. You got it? Lift up your eyes upon this day breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the shape of your most private need. Sculpt it into the image of your most public self. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning. Give poetry a round of applause. Everybody, give poetry a round of applause. And so as I talk today, students, 8th graders, professors, teachers, other leaders, I want you to think about the fact that as you engage in this conversation about civic engagement, about our democracy, that we must be prepared to think broadly about who we want to be as a society. Who are we now, and who do we want to be? What are our dreams for our children, for our students, of our grandchildren? What are our values? What is it that makes the difference? When I was talking with the architecture students, I recall the quote from Thomas Jefferson that says, in talking, this is the paraphrasing, when you talk about style, swim with the current, with the river current. But when you talk about principles or values, stand like a rock. And what are those values that we consider most important as we think about our democracy? I would argue that the truth matters. The truth matters. The Secretary of Phi Beta Kappa, our dear friend Fred Lawrence, says that what are we working to do with our students? It is to educate them to know how to present their arguments, their positions, and back them up with some evidence, to be open-minded enough to listen to other points of view and look for the evidence or the lack thereof to support those points of view. And then that wisdom, not just to know the difference between the two, but to try to find the common ground. My students say all the time, we are more divided now, people say, than ever. And when they say that to my history teachers in the room, because I met a couple of history teachers here, I say, well, let's go back to the 60s. The 1960s or the 1860s. In either case, if you go back to the 1860s, if you think about it, we had Congress people beating each other with canes. All right? In fact, how many of you have seen at least a review of the play Hamilton? We had two people, Burr and Hamilton, they had a duel and one killed the other. Leading figures in our society, all right? What am I saying? And then in the 1960s, we all thought of John Kennedy and his administration as Camelot in many ways. And yet President Kennedy, brilliant as he might have been, could not get much done because of the divisions in our society. It took a Southerner, Lyndon Johnson, to bring about some progress. And that was for the Civil Rights Act in 1964, the Voting Rights Act and the Higher Education Act in 1965. Now, Jason said something that touches my heart. We are all products of our childhood experiences. And you heard a part of mine, but I want you to hear me saying, so my parents insisted that I go to church in the middle of the week. Who wants to go to church in the middle of the week, right? Look at them raising their hands. Wow, you really are good guys, John. You got some good guys over there. They don't only play basketball, they do other stuff. And so I was rebellious, and so what they did was to placate me by letting me take two things that I love most. My math book, to do my little algebra, I was 12, and M&Ms, the good kind, with the peanuts. You know the kind I'm talking about, with the peanuts in them, right? So I'm eating my M&Ms, and I'm doing that, and they said, just try to listen to this guy. And the guy says, if you participate in this peaceful protest, this march, all of America will understand that even our children know the difference between right and wrong, and this will lead to our children being able to go to better schools. And better schools meant the schools where the white kids went, all right? They had more resources. I was tired of getting the hand-me-down books from the white schools, and society was telling children of color that we were second class. And so I wanted to see what it would be like to be in the better schools. And so I went home. Who was that guy that was talking? Dr. Martin Luther King. And so when I told my students that, they said, you mean you marched with Dr. Martin Luther King? Yeah, I did. And they said, God, you're old somehow. Yeah, I am. I am old, all right? I am old. I fake young, but I am old, all right? But here's the point. And so I went home and told my parents, I've got to go. And what did my parents say? Absolutely not, right? And I said, you know, you made me go. I didn't want to go. You told me to listen. I kind of listened. And now you won't let me do what he asked. You guys are hypocrites. At that time, you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. So what did my daddy say? Go to your room, boy. So I knew I was in trouble. They came in the next morning. They had not slept. The mother had been crying, and they said, it wasn't that we didn't trust you. So I want you to think about this, Bryson and Hezekiah, that your parents are about to tell you you can march and go to jail. Now, why did I want to do it? Because I wanted a better education. I wanted to see what if they were telling me I wasn't getting a good one, I wanted to see what a good education, because I knew I was ready to work really hard, okay? So they told me I could go. I did go. We were treated like animals. It was packed in there, not enough bathrooms. Kids are crying for a week. And in the middle of the week, Dr. King and our parents are outside the jailhouse. And he said this, what you do this day will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. Now, that was the early 60s, okay? How many people in this room were not even born or not in the world in 1963. That is perfectly disgusting. I want you to know that. If you were in the world in 1963, stand for a minute. Let me just see who we are. If you were in the world in 1963, give us all a round of applause for being around. We deserve it. We deserve it. And you look good. You all look good. You look really good. Why am I taking the time to do this? Here's my point. Here's my point. When I presented a paper, I was the chair of the Obama Commission on Education for African Americans, and the White House had to review things I was publishing. And all these young people in their 30s said, well, it doesn't matter whether people were born or not. It's just, it is what it is. And I said, and I asked them, they were in their 30s, and I said, how many of you were in the world when 9/11 occurred? Now, how many of you in this room were in the world when 9/11 occurred? That's more, right? You remember exactly where you were. You remember the lump in your stomach. If you were around in 1963, you remember when President Kennedy was killed, and it was just awful, that feeling. I remember that year when the 4 little girls, 3, 14, and 1, 12, I'm in that Spike Lee movie, and the church was bombed. I was in you go look up 4 little girls, you'll see me in this Spike Lee movie. It was horrible. And so even though our students, whether they're college students or children, can read these things, they're reading these things about the 60s and history. It's just like they're reading things about the Civil War. It's something away from their lives. You get my point? And this is why I always say, for every generation, tell your story. I want Hezekiah and Bryson, I want you to tell your story. You already have a story. There's a reason you're doing as well in basketball. There's a reason you'd come here tonight. For my future teachers, for my future architects, there's a reason you decided to go into your major. They asked me great questions. A question about how I got into math and science, or what is it that's wrong with education? What do we need to improve, right? And I said, I want us to work on helping every child to have a sense of self, to believe in herself, of any race, any background, to believe I can do it. And then if I had one other skill, one other really important characteristic, it would be a lust for reading. A lust for reading. Give me a round of applause for that, for reading. And I am speaking as a math teacher of 50 years. I goosebumps with math, as I told you. And before it's all over, I'm giving everybody a math problem, a 6th grade math problem. Aha, all right? But here's the point. If I teach a child to read, I can teach her to solve word problems. You see? Because word problems, you have to first be able to read and understand what it's saying. Then you take it into symbols, an equation. But most kids will say, give me the equation, don't give me that word problem. Now, I work with the international math competition from the National Academies and others. And in the world, what country has the most confident children in the world in mathematics? What group? In one group of children, 13 and 17-year-olds from this particular country, when they leave the test, they will say, we've got this. We've got this. And everybody says, wow, they are really confident. Which country is that? I heard America. I heard South Korea. Anybody else? Where? Japan? United Kingdom? India? Nigeria? Well, first of all, do you know who is number 1 in math in the world? It's Singapore. All the other Asian countries are up there too, but Singapore is number 1. But the most confident children in the world, American children. Never mind the fact that we're in the bottom half academically. So listen, we may not know much, but we sure think we do. Wait a minute. We are very confident. And I say it jokingly, but I also say it seriously because there's something special about teaching children to believe in themselves. The rest of the world does want that. They want their children to have that sense of confidence. We just have to teach our children to be more disciplined, you see, and to learn how to do problems beyond that kind. And so I want you to keep that thought about what education wants. We want our children to have both this sense of self and this sense of reading. Okay, so here, 3 or 4 questions. Number 1, the president of Stanford asked college presidents the question, how long can anybody concentrate in a lecture? How long can a college student concentrate in a lecture before they fade out? What do we want to hear? I heard 12 to 15 minutes, 7 minutes, 4 minutes. Who said 4? So you've already faded out on me, right? I got it. I got it. You already faded out on me. I got it. I heard 4, 7, 15, 20. Anybody else? 12. 4, 5. For college students, it's 7 minutes. Now, for disciplined adults, what would NIH, National Institutes of Health, the neuroscientists, how long can somebody? Somebody said 20, somebody else? 7.5. Oh, he's just another half minute. You don't think a lot of your colleagues do, you, right? Anybody else? 20 and 7.5. Anybody else? 25? 15? It's 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Now, here's the difference, though. For the disciplined, successful educators, you can be looking at me, but you could be thinking about what you got to do when you go home, but you just look at me like you really are. In other words, you look at somebody, the teacher, like you're really into what they're saying, when you're really thinking about something else, all right? Kids tend to fade out and they just go and text or something. But what happens is, if you're disciplined, you fade out, but you come back. You think about something else you have to do and you come back. Why am I telling you all this? Notice, when I ask questions, I get even more engagement from you. You get my point? If I just try to open your head and pour something in, it becomes very boring. And one of our challenges when we think about education at every level, when we think about talking about democracy and politics and why people do or do not get involved, is that we tend to have a movie theater approach. Usually the lights are low, there's a screen up here, the speaker is the person talking, and we passively take it in. And one of the points I'd make about education and about our conversations about democracy is to make it clear this is about all of us. Somebody said this, and I really liked it. Somebody made the comment from the architect students who said, what can I do when thinking about social justice or changing and civic engagement? There are things we can do as a community, but what can I do individually? Which is such a powerful statement also. If you look at my book, The Empowered University, the first sentence in the book says, it's not about me, the leader, it's about all of us. When we think about running the university or running the country, we tend to think only about the president, maybe the vice president with him, but that's it. We don't think about all the layers of leadership and governance that we have at a university, in a school system, in the country. And the message about civic engagement has to be we all are part of that leadership. And an expert told me once, you can never not lead. Each of us, you can never not lead. Now, my mother was an English teacher who had been a child maid. And the wealthy white woman gave her a chance to start reading books in her house. And it was because of that, she said, her girlfriends would be upset when she went home. Because they would say, Maggie, come on outside and play. And my mother would say, no, I want to read this book. And they said, no. Reading books is for school. Reading books is just, and that's the way most American children think. You just read because you have to in school. Not for pleasure, not for self-enhancement. But she said the more she read, the better a reader she became. And the better a reader she became, the more proficient a reader she became, the more she enjoyed the experience. And the more she enjoyed reading, the more reading she did. All right? And there is the point. That our challenge when thinking about engagement, when thinking about civic engagement and the democracy, is that the more of it we do and the more we see the difference we can make, the more we appreciate it and the more of it we will do. And so I want you to think about mindset as you have your conversations. It's difficult to have conversations about some of the topics you got there. Your topics are excellent. To David Roof and others, excellent. When you talk about the racial divide and you talk about getting people involved in different areas. My name, when I went to Illinois, I went to my beloved Hampton, and there were white teachers there, but it was a black college at the time. I had grown up in Birmingham, and I was precocious. I was a nerdy little kid, so I had finished high school when I was 14. And they kept me back. My mother thought I was too immature to go over to Morehouse. And so I took college courses in school there at Ullman. But I graduated at 15, went to college, finished the math major at 18. So I was moving fast. Not because I'm any smarter, but because I had older parents who had been teachers. And so they had me reading at a young age. And I was doing word problems. So it was that. And the fact they sent me to Massachusetts in the summers to see what it would be like to be in school with white kids. And the education was far superior to my school or to Southern education. Anyway, but the other point was nobody would speak to me. I was a fat little gregarious kid, and I'd go up to be, hi, I'm Freeman Hrabowski from Birmingham, and they'd look at me like I was crazy. Nobody would speak, not even the teacher. And so, interestingly enough, when I called home and I said, they don't like me. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, even the teacher won't speak to me. And she said this. I want you to hear this. I want you all to hear this part. She said, Freeman, she said, are you getting a good education? I said, yeah. She said, do you see any other black kids there? And you're like, no. Do you see any other kids from the South there? No. She said, I want you to sit down when I tell you this. She said, you know I love you, right? I said, yeah. She says, I want you to suck it up. She said, because guess what? The world is not fair. Sometimes people will not be fair to you, but you must believe, Hezekiah, I want you all to think about this, and Bryson, you must believe in yourselves, okay? And there will be people who will be fair. It's not like everybody in one race is not fair. No, they're not used to having black kids there, and that's all of that, but you just want to get the education and believe in yourself. Okay, it was such an important lesson. I learned later, she got off the phone and cried like a baby because she didn't want people treating me unfairly, but it was the world. Why do I tell you that? So I decided to go. They didn't want me to go to one of the places in New England because she was worried about me at 15. So I went to a black college, had a wonderful experience, a lot of white professors, and then I went to Illinois. And in all my classes in grad school, in that first program, in the master's program, in abstract algebra and topology and numerical analysis, every class I went to, everybody was a man. There were no women in the class. There were no women professors. One white woman who was not tenure track, PhD, and she had a way of looking at me as if to say, I understand what you're going through. There were 100 faculty, all men, and her. All right? She says, I know what you're going through. And I'll never forget, in every class, I'm sitting up front, and the professor comes in, looks at me, and says, this is algebraic topology. The next class, this is set theory. And their point was, you're in the wrong class. Now, I came to understand later, if you've never seen anybody looking like me in your class, you think I'm in the wrong class. But I learned, after the first time it happened, I learned this lesson. When the professor came in and would look at me, I would say, this is set theory, right? In other words, I'm supposed to be here. But the lesson I learned from that experience in Massachusetts and in grad school was no time to be a victim. Big round of applause for the idea. No time to be a victim. For my students of any race, boy or girl, there'll be times when people may not believe in you at first. You must believe in yourselves. Because in this democracy, we are all citizens. We are all with the opportunity to have an influence on things. And I want you to think about that, okay? And to toughen your skin. As I work on math and science, and it's a big deal that my predominantly white campus has become the leading producer of African Americans who go on to get degrees, PhDs, and MD PhDs, #1 in the country. Give them a round of applause for that. It's a big deal. And a part of it was changing our mindset so my professors, most of whom were men, could believe that these black children could do this and could be as excelling as my Asian students and my white students. But they had to believe it was possible. When I first went there, I said, show me the smart black kids. There were so few. And I said, show me the ones who are doing well in organic chemistry. And they said, if you're black and you get a C in organic chemistry, you must be really smart. Now, it sounds, some people say, oh, that's a racist statement. Well, you know who said that? The students said that. And the faculty said that. Because they'd never seen a kid of color make at least a B in the class. And the faculty were not being racist. They just hadn't seen it. And they would always just say, well, they don't have the background. So our first, most important lesson was to change mindset. Was to help them understand it can be done. In most of the school systems in our country, when you go to the gifted and talented programs, the IB programs, you do not see a lot of children of color or first-generation college kids because it takes a lot of support and privilege. And you know, if you go into a house and you see a lot of books, you know the kid has a chance. But in more than half the homes in our country of any race, you don't see a lot of books. So the children are not reading, and that's why the schools become so important. And what is my point? As we think about democracy, our mindset, our aspirations, our belief in this next generation, in the Brysons and Hezekiah in the world, that they can learn to read well and do their basketball, And if by chance they don't make it to the NBA, this was his question, all right, that they have a backup plan. And if you give me a round of applause for that idea, it's important. It's important. And I would say, young people, if you learn to read well and think well and write well, and if you listen to advice, okay, very important. All kinds of things are important. If you look at my TED Talk on success in science, it's the same thing for success in life. It's about high expectations. And what I'm talking about is not just of students, but high expectations of the faculty. My work with the National Academy of Sciences shows still today, the majority of American students who start in science and engineering get wiped out. We call the first year or two of science and engineering weed out courses, comfortably. And I can tell you, every campus in this country doesn't expect most students to make it in science. What's my proof? Look at the number of seats you have in the second year of chemistry compared to the first year of chemistry. It's always about only a third. So when we started doing things like our Chemistry Discovery Center at UMBC to have more group work, more feedback, more applications to the research part, and with much more work on immediately showing people where they're right and wrong and teaching them how to ask good questions. We had many more people succeeding, and then our problem was we didn't have the seats at the next level because the dean had planned for, the chair had planned for this number, and we had twice as many as we had. And on every campus, if you look at it, and that says the expectation is most will get wiped out. I would say the same thing to us about democracy, and this is two or three things, and I'm going to stop. The notion of creating a culture in our schools and in our university that can be characterized by curiosity. When the architecture students were asking me about what they can do to get a broader sense of society and how to design in a way that will have more interaction across people and to get more participation, I thought about Hrabowski, the Nobel laureate in physics in the 40s, who said when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' mothers would ask them at the end of a school day, what'd you learn in school today? He said, but not my Jewish mother. My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? When I think about our furthering democracy, when I think about our wanting more people to consider becoming elected officials, when I think about the fact there's a senator in here somewhere who is here just to understand what we're doing in education, I think about the notion that even in your discussions over this next day or two, encourage people to ask good questions, because the questions will determine the design, using my architects back there, of whatever the conversation and the solutions might be. And when people are worried about AI, the first thing I say as I work with folks on my campus at MIT is AI can be used to teach us to think more critically, because the only value of AI comes when you can ask a good question. If you ask ChatGPT a fundamental question, they're just going to give you facts. But to get a deep answer, you must first have a deep question. And so what we'll see in education, what we're going to see more in democracy with all the challenges of AI, will be an emphasis on teaching our young people and older people to ask good questions of themselves in groups of our elected officials and others. And then finally, mindset. There are people right now who are feeling, well, depending on whom you want to vote for, things are going down the tubes. And some who feel, well, neither candidate, blah, blah, blah. Well, the point is, our candidates will only be as good as we are. Did you get that? Our candidates will only be as good as we are. And what that means is the people we decide to elect, the people we encourage to get involved, okay? There is a term, neoteny. If you don't know it, write it down, Neoteny. It's from the book Geeks and Geezers with Harvard Business School. The geeks are under 30. The geezers are over 70, okay? And what they have in common is this quality. It's a science term, but he uses it, the author uses it to be forever young. As we get older, if we're not careful, we become very cynical. Been there, done that, all right? I had a group of young leaders I brought in to work with my president's council. Everybody was well into their 50s and 60s. And I said, we're going to get this pre-40 group and let them challenge us. And they came in, and they were kicking behind and not taking names. They came in and said, we can do that. And we said, no, we've tried that several times. But sometimes when people don't know what they don't know, they were solving problems. They were younger, fresher, and they had not developed the cynicism that we can develop when we get older if we're not careful. And I can say that because I am real old, all right? But it is my 12-year-old grandson that we are homeschooling and my college students, both of whom teach me to keep questioning myself and my attitude. If there were one thing I would say about democracy and where we are, it is that we must have the right attitude to think we can do this. My last book there, you got the Empowered University, empowered to look in the mirror at self and to look at culture. Somebody asked me about culture change. Culture, Eric Weiner says, is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to recognize it until we step back out of it. Did you get that? It is the values we have, the assumptions we make, the questions we ask, the ones we are afraid to ask, the incentives we give, the essence of who we are will be our culture. And we're at a point in our society where the values are such that we've forgotten to think about what it means to be more civil. We've forgotten what it means to try to see the other side. We tend to just write off half the people, and we are divided. And our challenge will be with this democracy is that if the person we want to win, and many of us may have one person in mind, but the fact is, whoever it is, the question is, after the election, who will we be? Because we still got to bring that other half in. And here's the part for education, that challengingly, when people have not had the benefit of that education, it tends to make them more susceptible to celebrity. We see that in the data. We see that among white men without a college education right now. What group in America today, demographically, gender-wise, ethnically-wise, has had the biggest decline in higher education in the last few years? White males. So when I'm talking to Southerners in Mississippi and Alabama, and they are worried about diversity or something, I'm saying, well, let's use the word inclusion. Because I say, I'm not just talking about blacks and women, I'm talking about your grandsons. Because they're no longer going to the military, and it's hard to get a job if you don't have an education, and so you become angry, you see? These are kids who become angry. What are they to do but to start fighting against government or whatever? And so the point I'm making is that this education we give, K through 12 and others, will be inextricably tied to the strength of our democracy. I want last term and one story, and I'm going to stop. Neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity. Look it up, neuroplasticity. It is the fact that our brains are constantly being rewired. Years ago, we thought that neuroplasticity was only really strong and a big deal for children. Now we know you can be 70 years old and continue to rewire your brain. Every time you learn something new, in basketball, you're creating the ability to be better. When you practice and you figure out a certain shot and you just work on it, your brain is learning how to do it. Those people who are really good, they learn something new and then they focus, and they got better and better and better. So mindset and brain. I decided in my late 60s to learn French, and my students said, Doc, you're too old. Okay, that was all I needed. Also, je parle français avec mes étudiants tous les jours. Mon professeur est très rigoureux. J'étudie l'histoire française tous les jours. I'm studying French all the time, and it's rewiring my brain. We're never too old to learn. And final story, my mother, having been the child maid, then an English teacher, and then a math teacher. Anybody remember the new math? Anybody older remember the new math? It was a disaster because universities didn't know how to go out and make teachers feel comfortable. We could be very condescending. And, we've learned now we've got to work with teachers as partners because teachers know children. College professors, some may, but a lot of them don't. They know theories. They know the research. You get my point? Got to have partnership. So mother went back and became a math teacher, and she was the one who, I said, use me as a guinea pig to see how you build language skills and word problems. At the end of her life, we brought her to Baltimore, and we had realized she was so smart, she was hiding the fact that she had developed dementia. So she knew how to make it seem that she knew who we were, but she really didn't. And I'm an only child. She knew I was somebody close. And I asked her sitting on the porch, I said, what's important to you now? Because I knew, didn't have much time. And she said, what's important? Relationships. This is to my teachers in the room, professors and teachers and educators. Relationships. She said, my relationship with my God, she said, just hold on to your faith. Because you don't want to see your mama die, and so I'm about to cry. And she said, no, just hold on to your faith. You'll be okay. And then she said, my relationship with my husband, he's a wonderful man. He had already died, but you learn if you know anything about dementia, you don't remind them. You just go with what they say, all right? And then she said, you know, I have a son. She's looking right in my face. I have a son. And I'm thinking she's going to tell me she had a kid when she was a teenager and never told me about it. So all of a sudden, my love and grief turned to anger. I'm thinking, too much information, TMI. If I haven't had a brother at this point, I don't want a brother. Don't you drop this in my lap and die. I'm looking real mean. And she says, he's a college president. She's talking about me. She doesn't know it was me. All right. And then finally she said, but you know, my relationships with my students. She said, whatever I had to give, Hezekiah, Bryson, my lust for learning, wanting them to learn as much as possible, wanting them to enjoy reading, believing in themselves. She said, whatever I had to give, I gave it to those children, and I will always live through them. Whether you are an architect and helps people with design, or you're a teacher and you're working to help a young person believe in themselves, what you give, or a college professor, what you do is to give them lessons that they may not appreciate at first, but as time goes on, they get it. And so I challenge you to watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. I tell my students, your character has everything to do with what you will do when you don't think anybody can see you, including your mother. All right? Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Whatever we believe in, whatever we love, will shape who we are as a democratic society, as a university, as a school system, as a person. Dreams and values. Thank you very much. All right, just a water down. So let's get into questions. Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I didn't expect that. Thank you. I'll make you laugh. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now remember, I went to grad school in Illinois, and Midwesterners don't give a lot of standing ovations, so I'm very impressed. You all are very even. I know that. Okay.